absorb the fast neutrons.
Exactly, as you predicted in 1939. Everything we were doing was based on that fundamental insight of yours. The 238 would absorb the fast neutrons and then transformed by them into a new element altogether.
Neptunium.
At least as fissile as the 235 that we couldn't separate.
Which will in turn decay into
plutonium. Plutonium.
I should have worked this out for myself.
If we could build a reactor, we could build bombs. That's what had brought me to Copenhagen. But none of this could I say. And at this point, you stopped listening. The bomb had already gone off inside
because
your
I
head.
got the central point already that one way or the other you were thinking of supplying Hitler with nuclear weapons.
You grasped at least 4 different central points, all of them wrong. You told Rosenthal that I tried to pick your brains about fission. You told Weisskopf that I'd asked you what he knew about the Allied nuclear program. Schartwig thought that I was hoping to persuade you that there was no German program, but then you seem to have told some people that I tried to recruit you to work on it.
Very well, let's start all over again. No British intelligence officer watching us, no Gestapo in the shadows, no one watching us at all.
Only me.
Only Margarita. And this time we'll make the whole thing clear to Margarita. You know how strongly I believe that we don't do science for ourselves. We do it so that we're able to explain it to other people.
Plain language.
In plain language, yes. Oh, not your view, I know. You would be quite happy to describe what you're up to purely differential equations if you could. But for Margarita's sake,
plain language.
Plain language. So, here I am, walking along the street once more, and this time I'm remarkably calm. And I'm listening carefully. What is it that you want to tell me?
It's not just what I want to tell you. The whole team in Berlin. Not Diebner, of course, not the Nazis, but Wirtz, Jensen, Houtemans, they all wanted me to come to you and discuss it with you. We all see you as a kind of spiritual father.
The Pope. That's what they used to call Niels behind his back. And now you've come to ask for absolution.
Absolution?
According to your colleague Jensen.
Absolution is the last thing I want.
You told one historian that Jensen had expressed it perfectly.
Did I? Absolution. Is that what I've come for? It's like trying to remember who was at the lunch you gave me at the Institute. Around the table sit all the different explanations to everything I did. Let's see. There's Rosenthal, there's Petersen, and yes, now the word absolution is taking its place among them all.
I thought absolution was granted for sins past, sins repented, not for sins intended yet to be committed.
Exactly. That's why I was so shocked.
Oh, you were shocked.
Because you did give me absolution. That's exactly what you did. When we were hurrying back towards the house, you muttered something about everyone during wartime being obliged to do his best for his own country, yes?
Heaven knows what I said. But here I am once again, and this time I'm profoundly calm and conscious, and I'm weighing my words. All right, I understand. You don't want me to give you absolution. You want me to tell you not to do it. All right, I put my hand on your arm. I look you in the eye in my most...
It's all the hands that picked me up, and I felt all the voices that encouraged me and set me on my way. Germany is my mother and my impossible brother. Germany is my wife and Germany is our children. I have to know what I'm deciding for them. Is it another defeat? Another nightmare like the nightmare I grew up with? War. My childhood in Munich came to an end in anarchy and civil war. Are more children going to starve as we did? Will they have to spend winter nights as I did when I was a schoolboy, crawling on my hands and knees through the enemy lines, creeping out into the country under cover of darkness to find food for my family? Will they have to sit up all night as I did at the age of 17, guarding some terrified prisoner, talking to him and talking to him through the small hours because he's going to be executed in the morning?
My dear Heisenberg, there's nothing I can do to help you. I have no idea whether or not there's an ally.
It's just getting underway, even as you and I are talking. And maybe I'm choosing something even worse than defeat, because the bomb they're building is to be used on us. On the evening of Hiroshima, Oppenheimer said it was his one regret that they hadn't produced the weapon in time to be used on Germany.
He tormented himself afterwards.
Afterwards, yes, at least we tormented ourselves a little beforehand. Did a single one of them stop to think for a moment about what they were doing? Did Oppenheimer, did Fermi, Szilard, or did Einstein, when he wrote to Roosevelt in 1939 and urged him to finance research on the bomb? Or did you, when you escaped from Copenhagen and went to Los Alamos?
My dear good Heisenberg, we weren't supplying the bomb to Hitler.
You weren't dropping it on Hitler either. You were dropping it on anyone who was in reach. On old men and women in the street, on mothers and their children. And if you had produced it in time, they would have been my fellow countrymen, my wife, my children. That was the intention, yes?
That was the intention.
You never had the slightest conception of what happens when bombs are dropped on cities, even conventional bombs. None of you ever experienced it. I walked back from the center of Berlin to the suburbs one night, after one of the big raids. No transport moving, of course, the whole city on fire. Even the puddles in the streets are burning, the puddles of molten phosphorus. It gets onto your shoes like some kind of an incandescent dog muck. I have to keep scraping it off, as if the streets have been fouled by the hounds of hell. It would have made you laugh. My shoes keep bursting into flame. All around me, I suppose, there are people trapped, people in various stages of burning to death. And all I can think is, how will I get hold of another pair of shoes in times like these?
You know why the Allied scientists were working on it?
Of course, fear.
The same fear that was consuming you. They were afraid you were working on it.
But Bohr, you could have told them.
Told them what?
What I told you in 1941, that the decision is in our hands, in mine, in Oppenheimer's, that if I can tell them the simple truth, that simple discouraging truth, so can he.
So that's what you want from me? Not to tell you what the Americans were doing with the bomb, but to stop them.
To tell them that we can stop it together.
But I had no contact with the Americans.
You did with the British.
Only later.
The Gestapo intercepted the message you sent them about our meeting.
And they passed it to you?
Why not? They had begun to trust me. This is what gave me the possibility of remaining in control of events.
My dear good Heisenberg, if this was your plan in coming to Copenhagen, then what can I say? Most interesting.
It's not a plan. It's a hope. Not even a hope. A microscopically fine thread of possibility. A wild probability worth trying, though. Or worth trying, surely. But we are too angry to understand what I'm saying.
No, why he's angry is because he is beginning to understand. The Germans dragged their best physicists out of Germany because they're Jews. America and Britain give them asylum. And at once you come begging and pleading to Niels to persuade them to give it up.
Margaret, my love, we'll try to express ourselves a little more temperately.
But the gall of it, the sheer, breathtaking gall of it.
Bold skiing, I must say.
Both. We are not skiing now. We are not playing table tennis. We are not juggling with cap pistols or non-existent cards. I refused to believe it when I first heard the news of Hiroshima. I thought it was one of the strange dreams we were living in at the time. But they had got stranger and stranger. God knows, as Germany fell into ruins in those last months of the war. But by then, we were living in the strangest of them all. The ruins had suddenly vanished, just the way things do in dreams. And all at once, we are in a stately home in the middle of the English countryside. We have been rounded up by the British. The entire team, whoever worked on atomic research. And we have been spirited away to Farm Hall in Huntingdonshire in the middle of the English countryside. Our families in Germany are starving, and there are we sitting down each evening to an excellent formal dinner with our charming host, the British officer in charge of us. It's like a pre-war house party, one of those house parties as in a play, which is cut off from any contact with the outside world, where you know that the guests have all been invited for some secret, sinister purpose. No one knows we are there. No one in England, no one in Germany, not even our families, but the war's over. What's happening? perhaps as in a play, will all be quietly murdered one by one. In the meanwhile, it's all delightfully civilized. I entertain the party by playing Beethoven piano sonatas. Major Rittner reads Dickens to us to improve our English. Did these things really happen to me? We wait for the point of it all to be revealed to us, then one evening it is. It's on the radio. And it's more grotesque than the one we were fearing. You have actually done the deed that we were tormenting ourselves about. That's why we are there. Dining with our gracious host, listening to our Dickens. We have been kept locked up to stop us from discussing the subject until it's too late. When Major Rittner tells us, I simply refuse to believe it until I hear it with my own ears on the 9 o'clock news. We had no idea how far ahead you had got. I can't describe the effect it has on us. You play happily with your toy cap pistol, then someone else picks it up and pulls the trigger and there's blood all over and people screaming because it wasn't a toy at all. We sit up half the night talking about it, trying to take it in. We are all literally in shock.
Because it had been done, or because it wasn't you who did it?
Both. Both. Oppenheimer wants to kill himself because it was he who discovered fission and he can see blood on his hands. Gerlach, our Nazi coordinator, also wants to die because his hands are shamefully clean. You have done it though. You have built the bomb.
Yes.
And you have used it on a living target.
You're not suggesting that Niels did anything wrong by his work in Los Alamos.
Bohr has never done anything wrong.
In any case, my part in it was very small.
The decision to build the bomb had already been taken. The bomb would have been built whether Niels went there or not.
Oppenheimer described you as the team's father confessor.
It seems it's a role I must play in my life.
He said you made a great contribution.
Spiritual, perhaps, nothing practical.
Fermi says that it was you who worked out how to trigger the Nagasaki bomb.
I put forward an idea.
You're not suggesting that Niels has anything to defend, anything to explain.
Bohr has never been expected to defend or explain anything. He is a profoundly good man.
It's not a question of goodness. I was spared the decision.
Yes, and I was not. So explaining myself and defending myself is how I spent the last 30 years of my life. When I went to America in 1949, a lot of physicists wouldn't even shake my hand. The hands that had actually built the bomb wouldn't even touch mine.
And if you think you're making anything clearer to me now, let me tell you, you are not.
Margarita, I understand how it feels.
And I don't. I'm as angry as you were before. It's so easy to make you feel conscience-stricken. Why should he transfer his burden to you? Because what does he do after his great consultation with you? He goes back to the Nazis and tells them he can build atomic bombs.
But what I stress is the difficulty of separating 235.
You tell them about plutonium.
I tell some of the minor officials I have to keep people's hopes alive.
Or they'll send for the other one.
Deepner?
Deepner. There's always a Deepner. Ready at hand to take over our crimes.
Might manage to get a little further than me.
Deepner. He hasn't a quarter of your ability.
Not a tenth of it, but he has 10 times the eagerness to do it. It would...
My dear Heisenberg, now with respect, with the greatest respect.
In which uranium was immersed in.
Not to criticize, but you had all gone mad.
We're almost there. We had this fantastic neutron growth. We had 670% growth.
You had lost all contact with the reality down in that hole.
Another week, another fortnight is all we needed.
It was the coming of the Allied troops that saved you. Perot said there was nothing to protect you all from the radiation.
We had almost reached the critical mass. A tiny bit bigger, and the chain would have sustained itself indefinitely. All we needed was a little more uranium. So I set off with Weizsäcker to try and get our hands on Deepness. Another hair-raising journey all the way back across Germany. Constant air raids, no transport, of course. We tried a bicycle, we never make it. We end up stuck in a little...
So, Heisenberg, why did you come to Copenhagen in 1941? No, it was right for you to tell us about all your fears, but you didn't seriously expect that I would tell you whether the Americans were working on the bomb.
No.
You didn't seriously hope that I could stop them.
No.
And you would have gone on to work on the reactor no matter what I said.
Yes.
So why did you come?
Why did I come?
Another draft of the paper, and this time you should try to understand it.
Maybe you'll even understand yourself.
After all, the workings of the atom were difficult to explain. We made many attempts, but each time we tried, they became even more obscure. We got there in the end, after all. So one more draft of the paper.
Why did I come to Copenhagen? And once again, I go to that evening in 1941. I had returned home after a long journey.
And suddenly, he is there.
And suddenly, I'm free of all the dark currents in the water.
Harold is unborn.
And the world is at peace again.
Look at them, father and son still. If only for a moment, and even now we're all dead.
Yes, for a moment, it's the 20s again.
We shall speak to each other and understand each other in the way we did before.
And from those two heads, the future shall emerge. Which cities will live? Which cities will be destroyed? Who will live? Who will die? Which world will be pushed into obliteration? And which world shall triumph?
My dear Heisenberg.
My dear Bohr.
Come in. Come in.
Can we hear a round of applause for the amazing actors that we have here? So the first part of why Heisenberg came to Copenhagen is over. We will be back with the second half in 10 minutes. Don't go anywhere. I repeat, ladies and gentlemen, the second part would be in 10 minutes. Don't go anywhere.
Every now and then, the sun would come out and leave that first marvelous warmth of the year on your skin. The first breath of returning life.
You were 22, so I must have been 38, almost the same age as you were when you came to Copenhagen in 1941.
So what do?
Put on our boots and rucksacks,
Take the tram to the end of the line,
and start walking.
northwards to Elsinore,
And back by way of Belawadi.
then westwards to Tisville,
If you walk, you talk.
talking for 100 miles.
After which we continue to talk non-stop for the next 3 years.
We would split a bottle of wine over dinner at your flat in the institute.
I would come up to your room.
That terrible little room in the servants' quarters in the attic.
And we would talk into the small hours.
How, though?
How?
How did we talk? In Danish?
In German, surely.
I lectured in Danish. I had to give my first colloquium when I'd only been here for 10 weeks.
Yes, I recall. Your Danish was already excellent.
No, you did a terrible thing to me. Half an hour before it started, you said casually, "Oh, I think we will speak English today."
But when you explained to me...
Explain to the Pope I didn't dare. That excellent Danish you heard was my first attempt at English.
My dear Heisenberg, together on our road. My love, do you recall?
What language you spoken when I was not there? You think I had microphones hidden?
Patience, my love, patience.
Patience?
You sounded a little sharp.
Oh, no, not at all.
We must follow the threads right back to the beginning of the maze.
I'm watching every step.
You didn't mind, I hope,
Mine?
being left alone?
While you went off hiking? No. Why should I have minded? I'm glad you had an excuse to get away. 2 new sons arriving one on top of another is rather much for any man to take.
2 new sons?
Heisenberg,
Of course.
and our own son,
Aga.
a nest. Number 5, yes?
Oh, yes, if it was 1924 and it was March, it couldn't have been more than...
1 week.
1 week. You didn't mind?
No, not at all. I'm pleased you could get out of the house. You almost went off hiking with your assistants. You took off with Kramas when you first came here in 1916.
When I suppose Christian was only...
1 week.
Yes. 1 week. You know, I almost killed Kramas during that war.
Not with a cap pistol.
With a mine on our war.
Oh, the mine, yes, you told me on ours.
A mine had washed up in the shallows.
And at once they compete to throw stones at it. What were you thinking of?
I have no idea.
Elsinore, there perhaps a touch of Elsinore.
Elsinore?
The darkness inside the human soul.
You did something just as idiotic.
I did.
With Chirac in Japan. You climbed on a pagoda and balanced with the pinnacle on a high wind on one foot. I'm glad I wasn't there.
The pagoda.
I'm glad.
Elsinore, I confess.
Elsinore, sir.
I was jealous of Kramers, you know.
His eminence, isn't that what you call him?
Because that's what he was, your leading cardinal, your favorite son, till I arrived on the scene.
You know, I liked him.
I was terrified of him.
He was a wonderful cellist.
He was a wonderful everything.
Far too wonderful. When I first came here to the Institute, I was terrified of all of them, all the boy wonders you had here. They were all so accomplished and brilliant. But Kramers was the heir apparent. All the rest of us had to work in the general study hall, but Kramers had the private office next to yours, like the electron in the inmost orbit around the nucleus. And he didn't think much of my physics. He insisted you could explain everything about an atom by classical mechanics.
Well, he was wrong, of course.
And soon the private office was vacant.
And there was a new electron in the inmost orbit.
Yes, and for 3 years we lived inside the atom.
With other electrons all around us, all across Europe.
Max Born and Pascal Jordan in Göttingen.
Why Schrödinger in Zurich and
Chadwick and Dirac in England.
Joliot and de Broglie in Paris.
Landau and Gamow in Russia.
Everyone in and out of each of those departments.
Papers and drafts of papers on every international mail train.
Do you remember when Gaudsmit and Uhlenbeck did spin?
There's this one last variable in the quantum state of the atom that no one can make sense of, and the last hurdle.
These two crazy Dutchmen go back to the original idea that an electron can spin in different ways.
And the first thing everyone wants to know is what line is Copenhagen going to take?
Now I'm on the way to Leiden as it happens.
It turns into a papal progress.
As I reach the station, there is Pauli and Stern waiting at the platform. They ask me what I think about spin.
You tell them it's wrong.
I tell them that
It's
I think
interesting.
Yes, I think that's the word I use.
And then the train pulls into Leiden.
And I'm met by Einstein and Ehrenfest at the barrier. And I changed my mind because, you know, if I am the Pope, Einstein is God. He has made a relativistic analysis of it and it resolves all my doubts.
And then, in the meanwhile, I'm standing in for Max Born at Göttingen, so you make a detour there.
And I meet you and Jordan at the station. And the
same question, what do you think of spin?
And when the train reaches Berlin, there is Pauli on the platform.
Pauli, who never gets out of bed if he can possibly avoid it.
Who has met me already on the way out, on the journey out at Hamburg.
He's traveled all the way back from Hamburg to Berlin purely in order to see you for the second time round.
To see how my ideas on spin have evolved en route.
Those 3 years, those 3 amazing years, those 3 short years.
1924 to 1927.
From when I arrived in Copenhagen to work with you.
Till you left to take up your chair at Leipzig.
3 years of raw, brazen northern springtime.
At the end of which we had what? We had quantum mechanics, we had uncertainty,
we had complementarity,
the whole Copenhagen interpretation.
Europe in all its glory again, a new enlightenment, the Germany back in her rightful place at the heart of it. And who led the way for everyone else?
You and Niels.
Well, we did.
Yes, we did.
And is that what you were trying to get back to in 1941?
To something we did. To something we said. I keep almost seeing it at the corner of my eye, even as I talk. To something about the way we work, something about the way we did all those things.
Together.
Together, yes, together.
No.
No? What do you mean, no?
Not together. You didn't do any of those things together.
Yes, we did. Of course we did.
No. Every single one of those things you did when you were apart, you first worked out quantum mechanics on your own on Heligoland.
Well, it was summer by then and I had my hay fever.
On Heligoland, on your own, in the middle of a rocky island, in the middle of the North Sea. You said there was nothing there to distract you.
Well, my head began to clear. And I had this very clear picture of what atomic physics ought to be like. I suddenly realized that you had to limit it to the measurement you could actually make to what you could actually observe. You can't see the electrons inside the atom.
Any more than Niels can see the thoughts inside your head, or you the thoughts inside Niels.
All you can see are the effects that the electrons produce on the light that they reflect.
But the difficulties that you were trying to resolve were the ones we discussed over dinner in the flat at Kisville.
Of course, but I remember the evening when mathematics first began to chime with the principle.
On Heligoland.
On Heligoland.
On your own.
It was terribly laborious. I didn't understand matrix calculus then. I get so excited that I keep making mistakes. But by 3 in the morning, I seem to have got it. I seem to be looking through the surface of atomic phenomena into a strangely beautiful interior world. A world of pure mathematical structures. I'm too excited to sleep. I go down to the southern end of the island. There's a rock jutting out into the sea that I've been longing to climb. I get up in the half light before the dawn and lie on top, gazing out to sea.
On your own?
On my own, yes, and I was happy.
Happier than you were back here with all of us in Copenhagen the following winter.
What? With all the Schrödinger nonsense?
Nonsense, oh come on, Schrödinger's wave formulation.
And everyone seemed to have turned their back on your wonderful new matrix mechanics.
Because they can't understand it.
And they can understand Schrödinger's wave function.
Because they'd learned it in school. And we're going backwards to classical physics while I'm a little cautious and accepting it.
Cautious? Well, not to criticize.
You described it as repulsive.
I said the physical implications were repulsive. Schrödinger said my mathematics were repulsive.
I seem to recall that the word you used. Well, I won't repeat it in mixed company.
In private. But by then people had gone crazy.
They thought you were simply jealous.
Someone even suggested some bizarre kind of intellectual snobbery. You got extremely excited.
On your behalf.
You invited Schrödinger here.
Oh, only to have a calm debate to resolve our differences.
And you pitch into him, and you fell on him like a madman. You meet him at the station, of course, and you pitch into him even before he got his bags off the train. And you go on at him first thing in the morning till last thing at night.
I go on, he goes on.
Because you never make the least concession.
Neither will he.
You made him ill. He had to retire to bed to get away from you.
He had a slight feverish cold.
Margareta had to nurse him.
I had to dose him with cake and tea to keep his strength up.
Yes, while you pursued him even into the sick room, sat on his bed and hammered away at him.
Perfectly politely.
You were the Pope, the Holy Office, and the Inquisition, all rolled into one. And then after, Schrödinger had fled back to Zurich. This I will never forget, Bo. This I will never let you forget. You started to take his side. He turned on me.
Because by this time you had become mad, you had become fanatical, you were refusing to allow wave theory any place in matrix mechanics.
You turned your coat.
I said that matrix mechanics and wave mechanics were simply alternative tools.
Something you're always accusing me of. If something works, it works. Never mind what it means.
Of course I mind what it means.
What it means in language.
In plain language, yes.
But what something means is what it means in mathematics.
Oh, you think so long as the mathematics works out, the sense doesn't matter.
Mathematics is sense. That's what sense is.
In the end. Remember, in the end, we have to be able to explain it all to Margarita.
Explain it to me. You couldn't even explain it to each other. The way you went on fighting through the small hours of the morning, you both got very angry.
You also got completely exhausted.
It was the cloud chamber that finished you.
Yes, because if you detach an electron from an atom and send it through a cloud chamber, you can see the track it leaves.
And it's a scandal. There shouldn't be a track.
According to your quantum mechanics.
There isn't a track. No orbits or trajectories, no tracks, only external effects.
Only there the track is. I've seen it myself. Clear as a wake left by a passing ship.
It was a fascinating paradox.
You actually love the paradoxes, that's your problem.
Well,
you reveled in the contradictions.
You see, you have never been able to see the beauty and suggestiveness of paradox and contradiction. That's your problem. You live and breathe paradox and contradiction, but you can no more see the beauty of it than the fish can see the beauty of the water.
I sometimes felt as if I was locked up in a kind of windowless hell. You don't realize how awkward you are. Crawling up and down the room as if you're going to eat someone. And I can guess who it's going to be.
That's the way we did our physics, though.
No, in the end, you did it on your own. Even you. You went off skiing to Norway.
Well, I had to get away from it all.
And you worked out complementarity on your own in Norway.
The speed he skis at, he had to do something to keep the blood going round. It was either physics or frostbite.
Yes, you stayed back.
And started to think at last.
No, you're much better off apart, you two.
Having him out of town was as liberating as getting away from my hay fever on Heligoland.
If I were the teacher, I shouldn't let you sit anywhere next to each other.
And that's when I did uncertainty. walking around Fallard Park one horrible raw February night. I'm completely alone in the darkness. As soon as I've turned off into the park, I start to think what you would see if you could train a telescope on me from the mountains of Norway. You would see me by the street lamps on Bledam's Wedge, and then nothing as I vanished into the darkness, and another glimpse of me as I walked past the street lamps next to the bandstand. That's exactly what you see in a cloud chamber. Not a continuous track, but a series of glimpses, a series of collisions between the passing electron and various molecules of water vapor. Or think of you on your great papal progress to Leiden in 1925. What did Margareta see of that here in Copenhagen? A picture postcard from Leiden, perhaps, one from Hamburg, one from Berlin. Because what we see in the cloud chamber are not even the collisions themselves, but the water droplets that condense around them as big as cities around a traveler. No, vastly bigger still. Complete countries. Germany, Holland, Germany again. There is no track. There are no precise addresses. Only a vague list of countries visited. I don't know why we hadn't thought of it before, except that we were too busy arguing to think at all.
Because by this time you had given up on all forms of discussion. By the time I come back from Norway, I see they've done a first draft of the uncertainty paper and rushed it off for publication.
And an even worse battle begins.
My dear Heisenberg, it's not open behavior to send off a first draft to print, not till we have discussed it together. That's not the way we work.
No, the way we work is that you hound me from first thing in the morning till last thing at night. The way we work is that you drive me mad.
Because that paper contains a fundamental error.
Here we go again.
No, but I show him the strangest truth about the universe that any of us has stumbled upon since relativity. That you can never know everything about the whereabouts of an atom or anything else. Even Bohr now, as he prowls up and down the room in that maddening bay office, because we can't observe it without introducing a new element into the situation. A molecule of water vapor for it to hit, or a piece of light, things which have an energy of their own and which therefore have an effect on what they hit. A small one, admittedly, in the case of Bohr. Oh, well,
if you can tell where I am with the kind of accuracy that we are talking about when we're dealing with particles, you should still be able to tell my velocity to within what?
Something like a billionth of a kilometer per second. But the theoretical point remains, though, that you have no absolutely determinate situation in the world which, among other things, lays waste to the idea of causality, the whole foundation of science. If you can't know how they're going to be today, you certainly can't know how they're going to be tomorrow. I shatter the objective universe around you, and all you can say is that there's an error in the formulation. It is.
Tea, anyone? Cake?
Listen, in my paper, what we are trying to look at is not an electron off on its travels through a cloud chamber, but an electron when it's at home, moving around inside an atom.
And the uncertainty arises, not as you say, by its indeterminate recoil when it's hit by an incoming photon.
Plain language, plain language.
Plain language. The language of classical mechanics.
Listen! Copenhagen is an atom. Margareta is its nucleus, about right the scale 10,000 to 1.
Yes.
And now, Bohr is an electron. He's wandering about the city, somewhere in the darkness, no one knows where. He is here, he is there, he is everywhere and nowhere. Up in Fallard Park, down at Carlsberg, passing City Hall, out at the harbor, and I am a photon, a quantum of light. I have been dispatched into the darkness to find Bohr, and I succeed because I managed to collide with him. But look, what's happened? He's been slowed down, he's been deflected, he's no longer doing exactly what he was so maddeningly doing when I walked into him.
But Heisenberg, you also have been deflected. If they can see you, that piece of light, if they can work out what's happened to you, they can work out what's happened to me. But the trouble is knowing what's happened to you, for which they have to treat you not only as a particle, but as a wave, for which we need not just your particle mechanics, but Schrodinger's wave theory.
I know I put it in the postscript to my paper.
Everybody remembers the paper. Nobody remembers the postscript. But the question is fundamental. Particles are things complete in themselves. Waves are disturbances in something else.
I know complementarity. It's in the postscript.
secret. We have to choose one way of knowing them. They can't be both. And the moment we choose one way of knowing them, we can't know everything about them.
And off he goes into orbit again, incidentally exemplifying another application of complementarity. Exactly where you go as you ramble around is completely determined by your own genes and other physical forces acting on you. But it's also completely determined by your own entirely inscrutable whims from one moment to the next. So we can't completely understand your behavior without seeing it both ways at once, and it's impossible. Which means that your extraordinary peregrinations are not fully objective aspects of the universe. They exist only partially through me or Margareta, as our minds shift endlessly back and forth between the two approaches.
You have never completely and absolutely accepted complementarity, have you?
Yes, absolutely and totally. I defended it at the Como conference in 1927. I've adhered to it ever afterwards with religious fervor. You convinced me. I humbly accepted your criticisms.
Not before you said some deeply wounding things.
Good God. One point, you reduced me to tears.
Oh, forgive me. I diagnosed them as tears of rage and frustration.
I was having a tantrum.
I've brought up children of my own.
What about Margareta? Was she having a tantrum? Klein told me that you reduced her to tears after I had gone, making her retype out your endless redraftings of the complementarity paper.
I don't recall.
I do.
We had to drag Polly out of bed from Hamburg once again to negotiate peace.
The police succeeded. We ended up with a treaty. Uncertainty and complementarity became the two central tenets of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics.
A political compromise, like most treaties.
You see, somewhere inside you there are secret reservations.
No, not at all. It doesn't matter. It works. It works. It works.
It works. It works. But Heisenberg, it's more important than that. You see, what we are trying to do in those 3 years, Heisenberg, not to exaggerate, but we turned the universe inside out. Yes. Here it comes. Here it comes. We put man back at the center of the universe. Throughout history, we keep finding ourselves displaced. We exile ourselves to the periphery of things. First, we turn ourselves into mere adjunct of God's unknowable purposes, tiny creatures kneeling in the great cathedral of creation. And no sooner have we recovered ourselves in the Renaissance, no sooner has man become, as Protagoras proclaimed him, the measure of all things. Then we find ourselves pushed aside once again by the products of our own reasoning. We are dwarfed once more as the physicists build the great new cathedrals for us to wonder at the laws of classical mechanics that predate us from the beginning of eternity, that will survive us till eternity's end, that will exist whether we exist or not, until we come to the beginning of the 20th century and we are forced to rise from our knees again.
It starts with Einstein.
It starts with Einstein, because he shows us that measurement on which the whole possibility of science depends. He shows us that measurement is not an impersonal event that occurs with impartial universality. It is a human act carried out by that specific point in time and space, by the one particular viewpoint of an observer. And we here in Copenhagen, in those 3 years in the mid-20s, we show that there is no precisely determinable objective universe. The universe exists, but only as a series of approximations, only within the limits determined by our relationship with it, from the understanding lodged inside the human head.
So this man that you've put at the center of the universe, is it you or is it Heisenberg?
Oh, come, my love, it's him, it's us, it's you, it's all of us.
Yes, but it makes a difference. If it's Heisenberg at the center of the universe, then the bit of the universe that he cannot see is Heisenberg.
So
there's no point asking him why he came to Copenhagen in 1941. He simply does not know.
I thought for a moment, and I almost got a glimpse of it,
And then you turned to look.
And away it went.
Complementarity again, yes?
Yes.
You know, I've typed it out often enough. If you're doing something that you have to concentrate on, you can't also be thinking about doing it, because if you're thinking about doing it, you can't actually be doing it, yes?
Swerve left, swerve right, or think about it and die.
But after you've done it,
Then you look back and you make a guess, just like the rest of us, but only a worse guess, because you didn't see yourself doing it and we did. Forgive me, but you don't even know why you did uncertainty in the first place.
whereas if you were the one at the center of the universe,
Then I can tell you that it's because you wanted to drop a bomb on Schrödinger.
I wanted to show him he was wrong.
And
But
Schrödinger was winning the war. When the chariot Leipzig first became vacant in autumn, he was shortlisted for it. You weren't. You needed a wonderful new weapon.
Margarita, not to criticize, but you have a tendency to make everything first.
Because everything is personal. You just read us all a lecture about it. You know how much Heisenberg wanted that chair, the pressure he was under from his family. I'm sorry, but you want everything to seem heroically abstract and logical. And when you tell a story, yes, it all falls into place. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But I was there. And when I remember, I'm there still, and I look around me, and what I see isn't a story. It's confusion and rage and jealousy and tears and not knowing what things mean or which way they will go.
all the same, it works.
It works. Yes, it works wonderfully, because within 3 months of publishing your uncertainty paper, you're offered the chair at Leipzig.
I didn't mean that.
And not to mention somewhere else and somewhere else.
In Zurich.
and various American universities.
I didn't mean that.
And when you take up the chair at Leipzig, you are how old?
26.
The youngest full professor in Germany.
I mean the Copenhagen interpretation. The Copenhagen interpretation works. However we got there, by whatever combination of high principles and of low calculations, it works.
Yes.
It goes on working.
It works. And why did you accept the interpretation in the end? Both of you, don't tell me it was because you wanted to re-establish humanism.
Of course not. It was because it was the only possible way to explain what the experimenters had observed.
Oh, maybe. You were becoming a professor. You wanted your own solidly established doctrine to teach. You wanted your ideas to be publicly endorsed by the head of church of Copenhagen. And perhaps Niels agreed to endorse your views in return for you accepting his doctrines, accepting him as head of the church. And if you want to know why you came to Copenhagen in 1941, I'll tell you that as well. You're right. There's no great mystery about it. You came here to show yourself off to us.
Margarita.
No. When he first came here in 1941, he was a humble assistant professor, grateful to have a job. Now here you are, back in all your glory.
This
From a
is so-
nation that's occupied most of Europe. You've come to show us how well you've done in life.
Margarita, this is so unlike
I'm
you.
sorry, but isn't that why he's really here? Because he's burning to show us that he's in charge of a vital piece of secret research. And even so, he's maintained a lofty moral independence. He's preserved it so successfully that now he's being watched by the Gestapo. Preserved it so carefully that now he has a wonderfully important moral dilemma to face.
Now you're simply working yourself up.
A chain reaction. You tell one painful truth and two others follow. And as you so frankly admit, you are going to go back and continue to do exactly what you are doing no matter what Niels tells you.
Yes.
Because you wouldn't dream of giving up such a wonderful opportunity for research.
Not if I can possibly help it.
You want to demonstrate to the Nazis how useful theoretical physics can be. You want to save the honor of German science. You want to be there to rebuild it in all its glory after the war.
All the same, I don't tell Spare that the reactor will produce plutonium.
No, you don't tell Spare the reactor will produce plutonium because you are afraid if the Nazis commit the resources and you fail to deliver the bombs. Please, don't tell us you're a hero of the resistance.
I have never claimed to be a hero.
Your talent is for skiing too fast for anyone to see where you are. For occupying more than one position at a time like one of your particles.
I can only say that I didn't do it. I didn't build a bomb. I know, unlike most of the gestures made by heroes of the resistance, I know what you think. You think I should have joined the plot against Hitler and got myself hanged like the others. Of course not. You don't say it, but you think it. Because there are some things that can't be said.
No.
What would it have achieved? What would it have achieved if you had dived in after Christian and drowned as well? That's another thing that can't be said.
Only thought
I'm sorry.
and rethought every single day.
You had to be held back, I know.
Whereas you held yourself back.
Better to remain on the boat and throw the lifeboat, surely. Better to fetch it about. Better to stay alive.
Perhaps.
Better.
Perhaps not.
Better.
Really, it's ridiculous. You've reasoned your way, both of you, with such astonishing delicacy into the tiny world of the atom. Now it turns out that everything depends on these rather large things on our shoulders, and what's going on in there is
Elsinore.
Elsinore. Yes.
Maybe you're right. I was afraid of what would happen. I was conscious of being on the winning side. So many explanations to everything I did, so many of them sitting around the lunch table, and somewhere at the head of the table is the real reason I came to Copenhagen. And again I turned to look, and I can almost see its face. But the next time I see the chair at the head of the table, it's completely empty. There's no reason at all. I didn't tell spare simply because I didn't think of it. I came to Copenhagen simply because I did think of it. A million things we might do or we might not do. A million decisions that make themselves. Why didn't you kill me?
Why didn't I?
Kill me. Murder me. That evening in 1941, here we are, and you've just leapt to the conclusion that I'm going to arm Hitler with nuclear weapons. You will necessarily take any reasonable steps to prevent it happening.
By murdering you?
We are in the middle of a war. I'm your enemy. There's nothing odd or immoral about killing enemies.
I should fetch out my cap pistol.
You won't need your cap pistol. You won't even need a mine. You can do it without any loud bangs, without any blood, without a spectacle of suffering, as cleanly as a bomb aimer pressing his release 3,000 meters above the earth. You wait till I've gone, then you come down here, sit down in your favorite armchair, and repeat aloud to Margareta in front of our unseen audience what I've just told you. I'll be dead as soon as poor Casimir, a lot sooner than Gameau.
Suggestion is
most interesting, so interesting that it never even occurred to you. Complementarity once again. I'm your enemy, I'm also your friend. I'm a danger to mankind, but I'm also your guest. We have one set of obligation to the world in general, and the other sets never to be reconciled to our fellow countrymen, to our children, to our neighbors. We have to go through not 2 splits at the same time, but 22. And all we can do is look afterwards and see what happens.
I'll tell you another reason why you did uncertainty. You have a natural affinity for it.
I must but a gratifyingly chastened figure when I returned in 1947, crawling on my hands and knees again, my nation back in ruins.
You were demonstrating that once again, personally, you had come out on top.
Begging for food parcels.
Established in Göttingen, under British protection, in charge of post-war German science.
That first year in Göttingen, I slept on straw.
Elizabeth said you had the most charming house thereafter.
I was given it by the British.
You knew foster parents who confiscated it from someone else.
Enough, my love.
No, I've kept these thoughts to myself for all these years. But it's so maddening to have this clever son forever prancing about in front of our eyes, forever begging to be told what the limits to his freedom are. If only he can go out and transgress them. Crawling on your hands and knees? Really? It was my dear, good, kind husband who was crawling on his hands and knees in the darkness of 1943, crawling to the beach to escape being killed in his own homeland, fleeing like a thief. The protection that you boasted about in the German embassy did not last for very long. We were incorporated into the Reich.
But I did try to warn you in 1941. You wouldn't listen. At least board across to Sweden.
And just as the fishing boat was taking him across the Sound, there were 2 freighters arriving in from Germany to ship the entire Jewish population of Denmark eastwards. The great darkness of the human soul was coming in to engulf us all.
I did try to warn you.
And where were you? Shut up like a Sam savage in a cave trying to conjure up an evil spirit from a hole in the ground? That's what it came to. All that shining springtime of the 1920s, that's what it produced. A more efficient machine for killing people.
It breaks my heart every time I think of it. It broke all our hearts.
And this wonderful machine may yet kill every man, woman, and child. And if it's true that we are at the center of the universe, we are the ones that keep it in being, what will be left?
Darkness. Total and final darkness.
Even the questions that we have will at last be extinguished. Even the ghosts will die.
All I can say is I didn't do it. I didn't build the bomb.
No, you didn't. And I'll tell you why. It's the simplest reason of all. Because you couldn't. You didn't understand the physics.
That's what Goudsmith said.
And Goudsmith knew. He was one of your magic circle. It was him and Uhlenbeck who did spin.
All the same, he had no idea how much I did or didn't understand about the bomb.
Goudsmith tracked you down for Allied intelligence. He interrogated you after the war.
He blamed me, of course. His parents died in Auschwitz, and he thought I should have done something to save them. I don't know what. So many hands raising from the darkness for a lifeline, and no lifeline that could ever reach them.
He said you didn't understand the crucial difference between a bomb and a reactor.
I understood it very clearly. I simply didn't tell the others. You can check if you don't believe me.
Oh, but secretly.
Everything was carefully recorded.
Oh, there were witnesses.
Unimpeachable witnesses.
Oh, who wrote it down?
Who recorded it and transcribed it.
Even though you didn't tell anyone.
I told one person. I told Otto Hahn that night in Farm Hall, after everyone had finally gone to bed, after we had heard the news and we were alone in the darkness, I gave him a reasonably good account of how the bomb had worked.
After the event?
After the event, yes, when it didn't matter anymore. All the things that Goudsmith said, I didn't understand. The fast neutrons in 235, the reflective shell to reduce the neutron escape, and even the method of triggering it.
The critical mass. That's the most important thing, the amount of material required to establish a chain reaction. Did you tell him the critical mass?
I gave him a figure, yes. You can look it up, it's all recorded. Because that was the other secret of the house party. Deibner asked me when we first arrived if I thought they were hidden microphones. I laughed. I said the British were far too old-fashioned to know Gestapo methods, but I underestimated them. They were recording everything. They had microphones hidden everywhere. They were recording everything we went through that night, everything I told Han in the small hours.
The critical mass, you said you gave him a figure. What was the figure you gave him?
I forget.
Heisenberg.
It's in the record, look it up.
The figure for the Hiroshima bomb
Was 50 kilograms.
So that is what you told him, 50 kilograms?
I said about a ton.
About a ton. 1,000 kilograms. You know, Heisenberg, I think I am beginning to understand something at last.
The one thing I was wrong about.
But your mathematics, Heisenberg, how could they have been so far out?
They weren't. As soon as I calculated the diffusion equation, I got it just about right.
As soon as you calculated, you mean you hadn't calculated
There was
before?
no need to.
No need to?
Because the calculation had already been done.
Done by who?
By Perrin, Fluga,
By Perrin and Fluga. That was for natural uranium. John Wheeler and I showed that it was only the 235 that fissioned with fast neutrons.
Your great paper, the basis of everything we did.
So you should have done it for pure 235.
Obviously.
And you didn't.
I didn't.
That's why you were so confident. You spent the entire war believing that it would take not a few kilograms of 235, but a ton or more. And to produce it in a plausible time.
Would have needed something like 200 million separator units, and it was plainly unimaginable.
But had you realized that it would take only a few kilograms?
Even to produce a single kilogram would have needed something like 200,000 separator units.
200,000 is one thing. 200 million is another. You might just possibly have imagined setting up 200,000.
Just possibly.
The Americans did imagine it.
Because the calculation had already been done. The Otto Frisch and Rudolf Peirce actually solved the diffusion equation.
Frisch was my old pupil.
Peirce was my old pupil too. And so they should have been making the calculation.
An Austrian and a German.
At the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin. Instead, they made it at the University of Birmingham in England.
Because they were Jews.
There's something almost mathematically elegant about that.
They also started with Peron and Pfluger.
They also thought it was unimaginable. They also thought it was difficult.
And then one day,
They actually did the calculation.
they realized just how fast the reaction would go.
Therefore, how little material you would need.
The figure they came up with was a little over half a kilogram.
About the size of a tennis ball.
They were wrong, of course,
They were 100 times under.
which made it seem 100 times more imaginable than it actually was.
Whereas I left it seeming 20 times less imaginable.
So, all your agonizing when you came to Copenhagen in 1941 was besides the point. You could have always done it with the 235. You could have always done it without the plutonium. You could have done it without ever building that reactor.
Almost certainly not.
But just possibly.
Just possibly.
And that question you had settled long before you came to Copenhagen by simply failing to do the diffusion equation.
Such a tiny failure.
With the consequences, they went doubling and redoubling all across Europe.
Until they were large enough to save a city. Which city? Any of the cities we never threw our bombs on?
London, presumably, if you had it in time. And if the Americans had already entered the war and the Allies had begun to liberate Europe, then who knows?
Who knows? Paris as well, Amsterdam, perhaps Copenhagen.
So Heisenberg, tell us this one simple thing. Why didn't you do the equation?
The question is why Frisch and Pilz actually did do the calculation. It was a stupid waste of time. However much 235 it turned out to be, it was definitely going to be something that no one could imagine producing.
Except that it wasn't.
Except that it wasn't.
So why?
I don't know. I don't know why I didn't do it. Because it did occur to me. Because I assumed that it was not worth doing.
Assume. Heisenberg, you never assumed. That's how you got uncertainty. You rejected our assumptions. You always calculated, Heisenberg. The first thing you did with the problem was the mathematics.
You should have been there to slow me down.
Yes, you wouldn't have gotten away with it if I was looking over your shoulder.
Though in fact, you made exactly the same assumption as I did. You also thought there was no danger for exactly the same reason as I did. Tell me why you didn't calculate it, and we will know why I did.
Why I didn't calculate it?
Tell me why you didn't calculate it.
It's obvious why I didn't calculate it.
Because he wasn't trying to build a bomb.
Yes. Thank you. Because he wasn't trying to build a bomb. I guess it was the same with me because I wasn't trying to build a bomb. Thank you.
You bluffed yourself the way I did at poker with a straight and never had. In which case,
why did I come to Copenhagen?
One final draft of the paper.
And once again, I go to that evening in 1941. I crunch over the familiar gravel and tug at the familiar belt. What's in my head? I know it very well. I know it so well that I have no need to ask myself until once again the heavy door swings open.
He stands there blinking in the sudden flood of light from the house. Until now, his thoughts have been everywhere and nowhere, like unobserved particles through all the slits in the diffraction grating simultaneously. They now have to be observed and specified.
At once, the clear purposes inside my head lose all definite shape. The light falls on them and they scatter.
My dear Heisenberg.
My dear Bo.
Come in, come in.
And yet, how much more difficult still it is to see what's in front of one's eyes. All we possess is the present, and the present endlessly dissolves into the past. Gore is gone, even as I turn back to Margareta.
Niels is right. You look older.
I believe you had some personal trouble.
Margareta slips into history, even as I turn back to Bo. And yet, how much more difficult still it is to catch the slightest glimpse of what's behind one's eyes. Here I am, at the center of the universe, and all I can see are two smiles that don't belong to me.
How's Elizabeth? The children?
Very well, they send their love, of course. I can feel a third smile in this room, very close to me. Could it be the one that I see for a moment in the mirror there, and is the awkward stranger wearing it in any way connected with this presence I feel in the room, this all-enveloping and unobserved presence?
I watch the two smiles in the room, one ingratiating and awkward, and the other rapidly fading from incautious warmth to bare politeness. There's a third smile I know, that's unchangingly courteous, I hope, and unchangingly guarded.
You managed to get some skiing?
I look at Margarita looking at me, and for a moment I can see what she can see. Myself and the smile vanishing from my face as poor Heisenberg blunders on.
I look at the two of them looking at me, and I can see the third person as clearly as I see them. Their importunate guest stumbling from one crass and unwelcome thoughtfulness to the next.
I look at him looking at me, and for a moment I can see what he can see. Myself, Margarita, and here it comes. Here it comes. There's someone missing from the room. He sees her, he sees me, he doesn't see himself.
2,000 million people in this world, and the one who has to decide their fate is the only one always hidden from me.
You suggested a stroll.
You remember Elsinore, the darkness inside the human soul?
And out we go under the autumn trees into the blacked out streets.
And now there's no one in this world except for Bohr and the invisible other. Who is he? This all-enveloping presence in the darkness.
The flying particle wanders the darkness again. He's here, he's there, he's everywhere, he's nowhere.
With careful casualness, he begins to ask the question he is prepared.
Does one, as a physicist, have the moral right to work on the practical exploitation of atomic energy?
The great collision.
I stop, he stops.
This is how they work.
He gazes at me, horrified.
Now at last, he knows where he is and what he's doing.
He turns away.
And just as the moment of collision has begun, it's over.
I'm already hurrying back towards the house.
They're flying away from each other into the darkness.
Our conversation's over.
Our great partnership.
All our friendship.
And everything about him is as uncertain as it was before.
Unless a thought experiment. Let's suppose for a moment I don't go flying off into the night. Let's see what happens instead if I remember the paternal role I'm supposed to play. I control my anger. I turn to him and I ask, why?
Why?
Why are you so certain that it'll be so reassuringly difficult to do it with the 235? Because have you done the calculation?
The calculation?
Of the diffusion in 235? No, you haven't calculated it. You haven't considered calculating it. You haven't consciously realized there was a calculation to be made.
Of course, yes. And now I've realized it. And it shouldn't be all that difficult. Let's see. The scattering cross-section is about 6 into 10 to the power of minus 24. So the mean free path would be...
And suddenly, a very different, a very terrible new world begins to take shape.
That was the last and greatest demand Heisenberg made on his friendship with you. To be understood when he couldn't understand himself. And that was the last and greatest gift of friendship you gave to him in return. To leave him misunderstood.
Yes? Perhaps I should thank you.
Perhaps you should.
Anyway, it was the end of the story.
Although there is something that I should thank you for. That night, that summer night in 1943 when I escaped because of sound, and the Freitag was to arrive from Germany.
What has that to do with Heisenberg?
On the Wednesday evening when the Freitag came from Germany, there were 8,000 Jews to be arrested and crammed into their holes. On the Wednesday evening at the start of Sabbath, on the Friday at the start of Sabbath, as the SS began the roundup, there was scarcely a Jew to be found.
But I thought that's because they'd been hidden in people's homes and churches and country cottages.
Yes, but how did that happen? Because someone had tipped them off, someone from the German embassy.
George Duckwitz, the shipping specialist.
Your man.
One of them.
He was a remarkable informant. He told us the day before the Freitag came. He told us the very day Hitler issued the orders. He told us the exact time the SS would move.
I thought it was the resistance that got the people out of their hiding places and shipped them across the Sound.
For a handful of us to escape in a fishing smack past the German patrol boats was remarkable enough. But a whole armada of them, with the best part of 8,000 Jews of Denmark on board, it was like the Red Sea parting.
I thought there were no German patrol boats that night.
Yes, they'd all been suddenly reported unseaworthy.
How they got away with it, I can't imagine.
Duckwitz again.
He also went to Stockholm and urged the Swedish government to accept everyone.
So I should thank you.
For what?
My life, all our lives.
Nothing to do with me by that time, I regret to say.
Although you came back to Copenhagen after I'd gone.
To make sure our people didn't take over your institute in your absence.
I never thank you for that either.
You know, they offered me a cyclotron.
You could have separated little 235 with it.
In the meanwhile, you were going on from Sweden to Los Alamos.
to play my small but helpful part in the deaths of 100,000 people?
Niels, you did nothing wrong.
Didn't I?
Of course not. You were a nice man from first to last, and no one could ever say otherwise. Whereas you, my dear Heisenberg, have not been responsible for the death of a single solitary person in all your life.
Yes.
I did.
One man, or so you told us. The poor wretched soul you were guarding overnight when you were a boy in Munich, when he was going to be executed in the morning.
All right. One single solitary soul in his conscience to set against all the others.
But that one single solitary soul was the emperor of the universe, no less than each of us, until the morning came.
No, when the morning came, I persuaded them to let him go.
You know, Heisenberg, if people were to be measured strictly as observable quantities,
then we should need a strange new quantum ethics. There would be a place in heaven for me, and another one for the SS man I met on my way home from Eiger Lock. That was the end of my war. The Allied troops were closing in, and there was nothing more we could do. Elizabeth and the children had taken refuge in a little village in Bavaria, so I went to see them before I was captured. 3 days and 3 nights I had to travel. No transport moving at that time. And I had to travel by bicycle. And I had to travel in the night and sleep under a hedge during the day because all through the daylight hours, the skies were full of Allied planes scouring the roads for anything that moved. A man on a bicycle would have been the biggest target left in Germany. 3 days and 3 nights I traveled. Out of Württemberg, down through the Swabian Jura and the first foothills of the Alps, across my growing homeland. Was this what I had chosen for it? This endless rubble, this perpetual smoke in the sky, these hungry faces. Was this what I had done? And all the desperate people on the roads, the most desperate of all were the SS. Bands of fanatics with nothing left to lose, shooting deserters out of hand and hanging them from the roadside trees. And the second night, there it is. The one terrible familiar black tunic emerging from the twilight in front of me. And on his lips as I stopped, the one terrible familiar word, deserter, he says. I've given the travel order, I've written for myself. But there's hardly enough light in the sky to read by. And he's too weary to bother. He opens his holster instead. He's going to shoot me because it's simply less labor. And suddenly, very quickly and clearly, I'm thinking, it's like skiing or the night one on Heligoland or the one at Fallard Park. And what comes into my head this time is a pack of American cigarettes I've got in my pocket and already it's in my hand. I'm holding it out to him. The most desperate solution to a problem yet. I wait while he stands there looking at it, trying to make it out, trying to think. His left hand holding my useless piece of paper and the right on the fastening of the holster. There are 2 simple words in large print on the pack. Lucky strike. He closes the holster and takes the cigarettes instinct. It had worked. It had worked. Like all the other solutions to all the other problems. For 20 cigarettes, he let me live. And on I went. Past the weeping children. Past the lost and hungry children, drafted to fight and then abandoned by their commanders. Past the slave laborers walking home to France, to Estonia and Poland. Through Gammertingen and by Berark and Mindelheim, Miminj and Schönborn and Schöngau. Across my beloved homeland. My ruined and dishonored and beloved homeland. My dear Heisenberg, my dear boy.
Silence. The silence that we always come to in the end.
Of course, I know what they're thinking about.
All those children on the road.
Heisenberg himself wandering the world like a lost child.
Our own lost children.
And over goes the killer once again.
So near. So slight a thing.
Niels stands in the doorway silently looking at me. He turns his head away.
And once again, away he goes into the dark waters.
Before we can lay our hands on anything, our lives are over.
Before we can glimpse who or what we are gone and laid to dust.
Settled among all the dust we raise.
Sooner or later, there will come a time when all our children are laid to dust, and our children's children.
when there'll be no more decisions, great or small, to be ever made again. When there's no more uncertainty, because there's no more knowledge.
And when all our eyes are closed, when even the ghosts are gone, what will be left of our beloved world? Our ruined, dishonored, beloved world.
But in the meanwhile, in this most precious meanwhile, there it is. The trees in Pollard Park, Kamatingen, Mindelheim, and Baibrar. Our children and our children's children, preserved, just possibly, by some event that can't quite be located or defined, by that short moment in Copenhagen, by that final core of uncertainty at the heart of things.
Directed by Prakash Belawadi. Thanks to Prakash.